we have an intergenerational housing community comprised of families and seniors. We have many, many young working families here, families that have been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Across the United States, on the first of every month, rent is due, regardless of loss of job, regardless of increased medical bills, regardless of a global pandemic or national recession. This due date during these uncertain times brings incredible pressure on families and individuals with limited income. Those families, because of factors outside of their control, like a global pandemic, have to make very, very difficult choices, like paying rent or buying food, or paying for medicine. So we are grateful to Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan for joining us here today to share some exciting news about the next steps in resources to help prevent evictions, prevent foreclosures, prevent homelessness, and maintain housing stability for individuals and families like those here at West Broadway Crescent Apartments and across the state of Minnesota. So it's my pleasure to welcome the governor. I'll invite the governor to the podium to share this wonderful news.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Adams, thank you. First of all, thank you for hosting us here in this beautiful facility on a beautiful afternoon. And I would argue, as importantly, thank you for your leadership in this issue of dignity around housing, the ability how to build the coalitions necessary to get facilities like this built, and then showing what the impact will have. And you'll hear here in a little bit from Erica about what life looks like when you have stable housing. So I am really grateful. We're going to be joined, you'll hear a little bit from Executive Director Jenny Larson of Three Rivers Community Action. This is not an issue around housing and affordable housing that is confined to the metro area. This is a statewide issue. Housing has been something many in this room have talked about for decades. It's progress that has been made, but I'll tell you, like many things, it feels sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Or recently with COVID and the situation after George Floyd's murder, it feels like a 1 step forward and 4 steps back. And that's why it's important now more than ever that we step up and that the leadership that's here, you're going to hear from Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and someone who, what I have learned about housing, much of it comes from Commissioner Jennifer Ho, who has been instrumental, and along with Kathy Tenbrook, who are our subject matter experts. But I want to make a note of, we are joined here today by Ray Dean from Minnesota House, Bobby Joe Champion, former Commissioner Higgins was around here somewhere. Folks who have brought this issue, have led in the legislature. I think now more than ever, sometimes it's easy to look at our elected bodies and people kind of complain about what's there and there's not much what's happening. When you see a crisis situation, it's when leadership needs to stand up. It's the ability to be able to move resources and make adjustments to help improve lives. We've talked about from this pandemic that it was about the safety, the health, and the well-being of Minnesotans was our focus around COVID-19. And one of those things that is about safety, it's about health, and it's about well-being is stable housing. And we know that it has been under threat. It was under threat prior to COVID-19. It certainly is now. We are deeply concerned that the federal boost to unemployment insurance is expiring next week, and that will come to play then the following month, which will be September 1st, is where rents will be due. And again, that makes it very, very difficult for people to have any stability. It makes it very, very difficult for children to learn if they don't have a home, especially if they're trying to distance learn. It makes it very difficult for people to practice social distancing and use that haven of a home as a place of safety and refuge. And that's why what we do and what this movement today is meant to do. We're here today to announce $100 million in rental and mortgage assistance. We'll hear a little bit more about how this program will work, but this is the single biggest ask out of the COVID relief funds that the state of Minnesota has received that we're using this for. This is coupled with the $26 million that we put in earlier on emergency homeless help. This money will be available for folks starting about the middle of August. The plan is to hopefully have it in place so that the rent are paid before the 1st of September, and people will know early on to have some sense of security around that. We know that there's going to be a lot of work yet to do, but that was the purpose of what this help was meant to do. One of the things is we ask people to stay home to stop the spread of COVID. It's very difficult to do if they don't have a home. It's also very difficult if they don't have that extra $600 that was coming from UI for many people to afford the housing. So projects like we see here today, Dr. Adams' work, Ron Common Bond, and across this state, this is going to be a big boost. This is going to certainly help. So I am really excited to be here today. I'm grateful more than anything. And I think that leadership of our legislative partners who are here, Minnesota Housing, and then our partners in both the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector that make housing a priority. And with that, someone who's championed this her entire career, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Governor. I have not yet mastered the ability to not fog up my glasses while wearing a mask. So if anyone's figured that out, please let me know. So thank you so much, Governor, and thank you so much for having us here today. It truly is a beautiful afternoon as we're making this announcement. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have struck hard, especially for families who are already struggling to make ends meet before the pandemic. Minnesota had a very fragile housing market before the pandemic as well. We have more than 140,000 households making less than $50,000 a year, paying more than half of their income towards rent, and that just isn't sustainable. Today's announcement is the best way I can think of how Minnesota can make a difference in ensuring we are preventing homelessness. This $100 million in housing assistance represents our commitment to families who've lost income due to COVID-19 and whose housing is in jeopardy. And for me, this is very personal. My mom was able to make ends meet because she had rental assistance, and that support helped keep our family home. A safe foundation, a place to live, a place to grow, safety. And frankly, during a time of fear, a way to calm and ease those fears. And that is certainly what we hope this $100 million in housing assistance does for individuals and families all across the state. But unfortunately, only one family out of every 4 that is eligible receives federal housing assistance, and that is simply unacceptable. We also know that housing instability disproportionately impacts Black and Brown people. People of color are more likely to be housing unstable, to be evicted, and to experience homelessness. Housing justice is racial justice. And I'm pleased that we are acting today to do what we can to keep people in their homes. Today's announcement on preventing homelessness is critically important, but I also want to be able to provide some additional context to how this effort has always required a public and private partnership. We were working hard on preventing and ending homelessness before COVID-19 struck. We've had a state plan to prevent and end homelessness since the Dayton administration. And when Governor Walz and I joined the new cabinet, we've been pushing since day one on this particular effort. Through the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness, we've been working with communities in every single corner of this state to provide funding for outreach and shelter and critical services. Preventing and ending homelessness is not something that the federal, state, or local governments can do alone. We are grateful to our local and city and county partners who do this work in partnership with us every single day. And I am incredibly grateful for the providers who were stretched thin before, but who are now going above and beyond to respond to multiple crises at one time. We are all in this together. We all have to do our part, and we are doing ours. And that commitment does not start or end here today. When COVID began, we fought for our state appropriations and provided over $26 million to help shelters and street outreach workers give the most vulnerable folks among us a safe place to go during a public health crisis, creating over 2,100 additional safe spaces statewide. So that's 26 million, creating an additional 2,100 additional safe spaces statewide. We have also used state resources and partnered with local communities to help connect people who are outside during the civil unrest into hotel rooms with highly trained staff. These new COVID-19 housing assistance dollars will prevent even more people from losing their housing. We thank our partners for working with us on this incredibly important step of preventing and ending homelessness. We've done a lot of work to get to this point, and there certainly is more to do, but I am grateful for the passion, the commitment, and frankly, the ability to see real people who are in crisis in these moments. So now I would like to turn it over to both Commissioner Jennifer Howe and Erica Mackey, who is one of the residents of this beautiful apartment building, to share just a little bit about her personal story. And we're just really grateful that she has agreed to join us today. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner and to Erica.
Erica, you're the star. So you live there?
I live here, yes.
Tell me what you were doing before COVID.
Living a normal life, going to the gym, going to work, raising 2 children, 2 teenagers actually.
I understand that you lost your work kind of the week that COVID.
The week of COVID, actually on my day off, I was asked not to come back to work and that they were shutting down. And so I've been home since the 2nd week of March, actually.
Homeschooling at your.
Homeschooling 2 teenagers. That's been challenging. I actually had a senior graduate. Actually, I had my son graduate this year too. So,
Were you able to get on unemployment insurance and get
yes.
that $600?
Yes, that greatly helped me. It really took the edge off. I'm a single mom, so to have that incorporated really helped tremendously.
So what happens for you next?
So actually, I go back to work next week, which is really nice. But I'm still, we're not operating at 100%, maybe 25 to 30%. So still, there will be a need there. You know, if hours are cut, the housing assistance would be greatly appreciated. I mean, it's really probably more than ever because I know I have tons of friends, and I know tons of people who would greatly be affected by it and would need the help. So.
I really appreciate your agreeing to come and be with us today. I don't want you to have to stand up here the whole time, so if you want to grab a chair and sit off to the side, that's great. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh yes, absolutely. So thank you so much. That was all right, right? Yeah. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Jenny Larson, who's the Executive Director of 3 Rivers Community Action. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for having me today. I'm here representing a whole lot of housing providers and advocates from across the state who have been asking for this assistance. And I want to let you know we see the need for it, and we're ready to get to work. We're ready to use it. The housing assistance need is a statewide issue. As a community action agency and a housing provider in Greater Minnesota, I hear stories like Erica's every day. People are calling us from large communities like Rochester, mid-sized cities like Faribault and Red Wing, and small communities like Zumbrota and Wabasha. No matter the location of their home, they're scared of one thing. They're scared of losing their housing. We get calls from people who've lost their income, seen their income reduced. They're struggling, and they're struggling to make their housing payments. They're worried what's going to happen to them when they can't make those payments. We already have a shortage of affordable housing in Minnesota. There is nowhere for them to go if they lose the housing they already have. We're hearing from renters, homeowners, and residents of manufactured home communities. We're also hearing from our local partners like our counties, our cities, our school districts, other nonprofits, housing authorities. Everyone's calling us, asking us if we know of assistance, where are the resources? And we're also hearing from landlords, including landlords of small portfolios of rental properties who are really concerned about their tenants, but they're also concerned about keeping their small business afloat. We also hear a lot about renters during the crisis, but homeowners are affected too. At 3 Rivers, we work across the region to promote successful homeownership for first-time homebuyers. Many of the families we're working with are new immigrants who are breaking down barriers to achieve their homeownership dreams. The economic impact of the pandemic puts these families in danger of losing their homes too. Right now, we have very limited resources to help the folks who are calling us. Our current funds run out within weeks, if not days, of when we get the assistance. And right now, we've only been able to serve about 15% of the people who call us for help. So with that, I'm really excited to see this funding announced today and ready to get to work with our partners across the state. And with that, I'm going to ask the commissioner to come back up and finish this off.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, it's good for you to take a seat if you'd like to do that. Erica, please feel free to take a seat. You have to forgive me, I haven't been out for a while. I'm Jennifer Ho, and I'm the Commissioner of Minnesota Housing. Thank you, Jenny. I love being with other Jennifers, and thanks for the work that you do. The word that comes to mind for me right now is gratitude. Gratitude to the governor and lieutenant governor for making the tremendous commitment to Minnesotans who are struggling to pay their rent or their mortgage. Gratitude to Erica for sharing your story of what it means to be able to make rent and stay at home in this very stressful environment. Gratitude to partners like Jenny Larson and Three Rivers that are able to take resources like those made available today and deploy them quickly to prevent evictions and foreclosures. And partners like Dr. Adams and Common Bond Communities for creating such beautiful apartments that people can afford. Here we are in North Minneapolis in zip code 55411. There's a reason we're here in zip code 55411 today. Nearly half of the renter households in this zip code have faced an eviction. Nearly half of the renter households in zip code 55412 have faced an eviction too. North Minneapolis has the highest eviction rates in the state, but evictions and foreclosures are a statewide issue. This is not a city problem, this is a statewide problem. Counties like Blue Earth and Mahnomen are seeing the most unemployment insurance claims in the state, where about a third of the workforce has applied for unemployment in households that were already struggling to make ends meet. We expect the number of people who can't pay their rent to increase as we head into the fall, and we need these resources and infrastructure to be in place before we have an evictions crisis. So Governor and Lieutenant Governor, we thank you for this commitment. We will waste no time in getting this out the door and putting it to work. To that end, I am pleased to announce that today, Minnesota Housing is launching the COVID Housing Assistance Program. The request for proposals is open to grant administrators around the state that will disperse the funds locally. We're acting with the urgency that the stress of being behind on rent or mortgage payments requires, committed to breaking speed records in state government. We will be selecting local grant administrators in the coming weeks, and we anticipate that Minnesotans will be able to begin applying for assistance from these local administrators in the first part of August. These resources will go directly to pay the bills that are due. So we need to get the word out, both to tenants and landlords, to homeowners and financial institutions, to help everyone get ready. More information about the COVID Housing Assistance Program can be found on our website at www.mnhousing.gov. So let me express gratitude in advance to the counties and the community action programs, the nonprofits, and the many partners who will help homeowners and renters keep their homes. As the Lieutenant Governor conveyed, at the same time that we fight to help people experiencing homelessness today, during a pandemic, these resources will help many Minnesotans from losing their homes. Equally important is that we had a shortage of housing before the pandemic. We need more housing. Shelter saves lives, and housing ends homelessness. So thank you, Lieutenant Governor and Governor Walz. And with that, I will turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Ho. Thank you to all of our partners. You've seen us over the last week make commitments to childcare and keeping our childcare facilities up and running. You've seen us make commitments with our partners around food security, and today it's around housing. The basic things that make sure families are stable, making sure that children have the opportunity to learn in a safe environment, and the thing that gets our economy going again, making sure people are stable, and as you heard with Erica, can get back to work next week and make sure she's able to do that safely. We keep those businesses open. We start to move back to that sense of normalcy. So again, grateful for all the partners, grateful for the thought that went into this, grateful for the legislature, both here and the federal government on the CRF funds. And I think this is exactly what Minnesotans expect us to do as we build back towards that place of stability, as we move forward fighting both COVID and the rebuilding we see, especially here along Broadway and across Minnesota. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions, Tom. Yeah, and I can let the commissioner talk a little bit about this. We're going to make sure, and as you heard here, the number one reason people get evicted is they don't pay their rent. I know that there's been some concerns from the landlord communities that they have to have the ability to protect people if they have a bad tenant who is putting others at risk. And so the moratorium is still in place, and I think we're trying to address those issues. But the one thing I want to be very clear with is Minnesotans impacted by COVID-19 or the financial hardships they're going through, we're going to make sure that they're not evicted at this time. That just doesn't make any sense. And I think the goal is you see both the landlords, and this is the one thing I think needs to be said. We were on a call with our bank lenders who voluntarily got on a program to help us with this, of trying to lean into this. And I think the message there is that they don't want to see people evicted. They don't want to see loans go bad. They want to find out if there's ways to work. So for example, US Bank is putting forbearance on payments for up to a year with no interest or no penalties to try and keep people in there. That's just really smart stuff. And there'll be a little bit of a tweak to that, but it'll stay in that place of protecting, especially those being evicted because of COVID-19. Yeah, it's a good question. Who gets paid? Yeah, no, this is a great question. Who's eligible, how it's going to be paid, and where the money flows to, and then those partners who are skilled at this that will make it happen. Commissioner Ho, if you'd like to give a bit of the underpinnings.
Sure, and thank you for the question. First of all, I'll say that the agency has worked with community partners for a very long time with our Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program, which was there to do homelessness prevention before COVID. This really is a huge investment that reflects the enormity of the households that have been affected because of COVID-19. It's going to be available for households that are at 30%, 300% of federal poverty level or below, targeting households at 200% of federal poverty or below, and families who have been impacted by COVID.
How many people do you anticipate this will help, and what would be the average amount a family might receive?
You know, there's been a lot of modeling for how many people are going to need this. I think the thing that we really don't know is how many people are going to be impacted when the $600 plus up of unemployment insurance goes away. And because now we're at already 4 months of unpaid rent or potentially unpaid mortgages, it's really piling up. You know, we didn't have enough to be able to make, you know, everybody whole starting in April 1st when they couldn't make rent. And now, you know, we're staring at August 1st. And then, as the governor and lieutenant governor mentioned, the real impact of September 1st after that $600 plus up is gone.
Someone wants to make this program available. What do they do? These agencies around the state, I presume they make application, a financial.
Yeah, our goal is to make it as simple as possible. I haven't seen the criteria from the state yet on what the program is going to be, but our other assistance programs, so we're one of the Family Homeless Prevention Assistance Program providers in the state. There's a network. We cover the entire state, the network does. And usually it starts with a phone call. We can do a lot of work with the family over the phone, talk to them about what their income is, what their situation is, how far behind are they on their housing. And then we get some verifications from their landlord or their mortgage provider, and then we make the payments directly to the landlord. Utilities as well, yes.
I wanted to ask a question about COVID. New York State announced that they are going to order anybody coming from the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin to quarantine for 2 weeks. With COVID spiking around the country and with us kind of flirting up and down with numbers, what's your reaction to that? But are you looking at quarantining anybody coming in from other states? And are you looking at a broader mask ordinance?
Yes. And it's a good question. The New York announced today, I believe we're the 21st state that they have a quarantine. If you come into New York from Minnesota, you have a 14-day quarantine. Even though our numbers are relatively stable, as I've been saying, that we've seen across the country, they're rising in, I believe, 48 out or 47 of the 50 states. What you're witnessing is when you have the lack of a federal cohesive strategy, you see a 50-state strategy. And I think New York, what they went through, keep in mind, it wasn't all that long ago. We were seeing 400 and 500 deaths a day in New York City. And I think the hard-earned gains that they made, they're very nervous about backsliding, just like we are. We've looked at that, what it means to if we quarantine folks coming from high impact areas. At this point in time, we're seeing most of ours through community transmission that that we're having a bit of a time to track down, because a lot of it appears to be coming from bars, establishments, indoor facilities. We've not seen a lot where people have come in that way. As far as the broader mask mandate, yes, that's a conversation we're having. What I'm trying to do is, and I'll just be very candid, we've been wearing and talking about masks since the end of March. We've been trying to understand that this is the cheapest, easiest way, and the science behind it is getting stronger every day. Not only are they saying, there's a new study came out today, it lessens your chance of getting it, not just spreading it to someone else. And what we tried to get is we tried to get social buy-in. I'll just be very candid. There was a recent study that came out talking about, and it was done by Goldman Sachs, because the business community is convinced without a masking mandate, or a masking compliance, I should say, by the society, it's going to be very hard to get our economy back up and running. So they took 20 states, they looked at their economic activity, they looked at their masking on that. While our economic activity is as high as many states, our mask adherence was the lowest of the 20 that were looked at, meaning the number of people wearing masks. And so that's one of the things that I'm talking just this morning with businesses about, how do we build that ability to do it? And in an emergency, sometimes it takes being that mandate in there. So as I've said before, we are seriously considering doing this. We're trying to get buy-in. I will just be, again, candid with this group. It's disappointing to me to see legislators who know this go onto the House and Senate floor without wearing masks. We saw what happened in Mississippi. They had 26 legislators get sick because they refused to wear them in the Mississippi Capitol. What that ended up doing is shutting that down. So I think New York made it what they believe is the right decision for them. I think you're going to see other states start to do this. This is going to have a real detrimental effect on commerce across this country, because we don't have a unified strategy. At this point in time, we are not prepared, at least in the very near future, to make a move on quarantines of people coming in, because we don't believe that's our biggest source of spread. But we are in the talks around what we do about making sure people comply with masks.
As a follow-up, is it more difficult to create a mask mandate when our hospitalization and ICU numbers and deaths are all down or relatively stable, and cases have gone up a little bit, but they haven't spiked? Is it
I think,
politically difficult?
Yes, I think so. And that's the hardest part about this that I've been saying all along, that if you're not seeing it, it appears like you're safe and things are good. I think Tom's point is right. I'm very, at this point in time, I'm grateful that our number of ICU beds being occupied by COVID patients is the lowest it's been since April. Our number of hospitalizations is lowest. You're right, we're at 4.9%, but we're still creeping. But I think you see where you start to see trends, and that's what modeling does, gives you trends. I think in New York, what they're seeing is upper Midwestern trends. Ohio's trending higher again. Michigan's trending higher. I talked to the governor of Wisconsin the other day, and they had one day of 10% positivity. This morning, every day I look, I mean, I live by the math in my head now. They tell me we had 13,189 tests. I'm instantly thinking, what does 4% look like? Because I want to keep it under that 4% number. And each of the last 7 days, it's continued to bump up. We've risen about 1 percentage point over the last 10 days. But it's hard to make that case to people. I mean, it feels a little bit like, to me, if people are standing on the shore, I know they can't swim, and if they jump in, it's going to be trouble. When they're standing on the shore, it doesn't seem too scary. And so right now, nothing seems that scary of what's there. But I'm telling you, Arizona, as I keep telling people, it took them about 16 days to go from about 5-6% positivity to 18% positivity. And what that means is you go from having lots of hospital rooms to having no hospital rooms. You go from having lots of businesses open and commerce to having nothing open. And I have made this commitment from the beginning. It is our goal in Minnesota not to have to go backwards, but we have put those measures in there. We will, if that's necessary. And all of this is coming at a time when we've got big decisions about our children, about going back to school. Erica talked about this, about going back to work. She's ready to go back to work, wants to go back to work, but it's scary when you get there. What's going to happen when you get there? How do you keep employees safe? But your point is well taken, Tom. I do think it's hard on that because I think Minnesotans, this is what I don't want to, I think New York's doing this because of that. We have worked so hard to keep these numbers flat and keep in a pretty good spot. And it just is hard to maintain that. And now there's just that desire to go back out again. And I think now might be the time more than ever. If we would do a little bit of a push around masking, we would be smart around bars and not congregating. We would really get a handle on this. It would take us into the fall in better shape. Yeah.
55411 half of the residents have expressed eviction. So that's the rule. What's being done to kind of stop the night from coming in? So what kind of initiatives and programs are you looking at to address that?
Yeah, I think the eviction moratorium around that, but I think you hit on something big here. The issues around why those numbers are so high go back to the issues that were expressed in the outrage around George Floyd's murder. We have systemic racism that makes home ownership very difficult for community of color, especially the Black community. We've seen wages be stymied and being under what a white community get. We have achievement levels for our students of color that are under where their white students are. All those things lead to a generational loss of wealth, if you will, and it makes it very difficult. My guess is that because of that, we have more people renting, and they're more vulnerable than they would be if they had home ownership, had equity in their homes, and people can weather a bit of this storm. So I think, as we talked about the short-term crisis of moving people out of the streets that are homeless, of keeping people in their homes so they don't get evicted, we have to simultaneously look at what are the structural issues and the structural barriers that have created this wealth gap in Minnesota, this education gap in Minnesota, this fairness gap in justice in Minnesota. And those are the things that I still really wish were in a special session. We need to hold some hearings on those things. We need to start talking about those types of things, because that's going to really get at the core of this. This is a good triage, but let's be very clear. This is a triage situation. We should not be in neighborhoods that had half of the residents that are facing eviction, because I guarantee you, you go to other parts of the state and there'll be a strong correlation with those evictions to skin color. And
this is a heck of an issue. You have Republicans and Democrats, landlords and tenants, dogs and cats, all agreeing that this had to happen and should happen. And it's 4 months later, and you have to do it by executive order. Why?
yeah, I feel like I should have Senator Champion come up here to answer this. I think that's the nature of it. And I don't even mean this facetiously. I do think there's an argument to be made. Legislative bodies in a democracy are meant to move slowly so that you don't run over things. And that in itself is what I would argue. This comes back to the discussion we're having around this. I certainly don't enjoy that these decisions have to be made through executive order or be made through the executive branch alone. I think there are really smart people who are in touch with their communities that should be doing this in the legislature. But once again, we have yet to have a Senate hearing on why George Floyd got killed out there. We have yet to have that hearing. And I think people are really worrying about that. And then that's the type of thing that I keep asking. I am more than happy to have the legislature do these things, but if it's just very hard to get a decision that way. And some of these things need to move. But I will be the first to say, our system is set up to have those checks and balances in place. It's set up to have a lot of voices around the table. That is very healthy. But we've gotten ourselves into the situation where everything is so politically charged. I mean, I am still somewhat baffled around the mask situation. I'll just be candid with you. I do not understand why we got ourselves into that when it would have been much easier just to be unified about that. I think wearing masks alleviates the need to do many of the other mitigations we were doing, and you still are able to get the economic activity and lower the positivity rate. That seems like that's a, if I may, a very conservative approach to dealing with COVID-19, and yet we're struggling with that. So I'm sorry it took us 4 months to get this done. We're still waiting again, and the legislature's in session. I'm hopeful we'll come out with a bonding bill. I'm hopeful and encouraged that police reform is being talked about now, but we'll see. And we'll decide whether we come out of this. Again, I said this a month ago in the moments after George Floyd's death, that the world was watching us and seeing how we responded. 11 states have moved fairly significant police reforms. We have not. And I think it maybe speaks to some of the deeper issues that we still have a challenging time in Minnesota around race. We still have a challenging time about dealing with systemic racism, and we're still going to have to come back at it. But glad today that this 100 million is going to be moved. Yes.
Now, some of the other aid programs have apportioned out a certain amount of money for greater Minnesota versus the metro area. Is that anything that you're looking at doing with the housing assistance?
Commissioner.
Thank you for the question about whether the money is being portioned out between greater Minnesota and the metro area. I think one of the things that we're doing with the RFP, sorry, Jenny, it just went live. It'll be there when you get back to the office. The RFP that just went live is really hearing communities describe both their need and their capacity to get the money out the door quickly. We know that this has hit all over the state, and we have a network statewide. I don't think the right strategy right now is to just decide a percent for different parts of the state. But 100 million, you have to put that in context. spending $100 million between now and the end of the year on this, usually this is a $10 million annual appropriation. So, I mean, the governor's math is better than mine, but this is a lot. And so we're really just hoping that we can get it out with the speed that helps people before they face an eviction when the state of emergency lifts. And so, we just need to work with speed, and we'll learn as we go. We'll have the ability to move money around if we find that there's a greater need in some part of the state than another. We'll have the ability to do some shifting, but the most important thing right now is we got to get it out there. I've never been through a pandemic before, and I feel like we're learning in real time all the time. Like I said, this is much larger than the monthly capacity of our existing network, but everybody has stepped up right now. The nonprofits, that oftentimes work on a shoestring are doing triple duty. And so I think we're just hoping that everybody can, rise to the occasion and meet the need. And then, after we get through September, we can take a look at what happened in September, and we'll take a look at what happened in October. And like everything else that we're doing right now, we're just adjusting in real time. I haven't had a plan on my desk that lasted for more than 72 hours. And so we will learn as we go. And that's our commitment, is to nimbleness and to learning from our partners and to listening to communities that are most impacted and figuring out how to help folks so we don't end up with more people on the streets.
One more question.
Do the residents of this apartment complex get federal as well as state subsidies? And how is that looking? I mean, will this bolster that, or are they at risk of losing it?
Happy to take it. Yeah. So my friends at Common Bond can follow up with you directly on the specifics of it. But my understanding is this is a house that was built with 4% low-income housing tax credits. That's the largest source of capital for the financing of affordable housing that we have in the country right now. There might be a couple units that have a project-based subsidy tied to them. There might be a couple residents or households that have a tenant-based Section 8 housing choice voucher. But by and large, the apartments were constructed so that the rent would be affordable to the people who live in the community.
Hey, Governor, can you give us your reaction to denying the request for aid for rebuilding cities?
Well, yeah, I'm a little disappointed, but it's not that unusual. The situations where, if you will, a man-made disaster, some have been funded, some have not. I don't believe Baltimore, Ferguson were funded. I think Los Angeles was. The fact of the matter is that we had a catastrophe in Minneapolis that was precipitated by the police killing of George Floyd. Folks took to the streets. And again, I think we know many of them from Minnesota, but not necessarily from the Twin Cities area. The federal government has chosen not to. We'll probably appeal, try to go to that. I will call. I'm going to try and talk to the vice president a little bit about this. But the state of Minnesota has a commitment to making sure that we rebuild. And I'll tell you, amongst that, the most disappointing thing about that denial is that appeared to be some happiness among some legislators that the federal government denied that, or this idea that why should the rest of Minnesota pay for Minneapolis? That is a wrong road to go down. It's not the one. We're there for one another. I used to drive me nuts in Congress where I would watch people, members of Congress, vote against aid for a disaster. And then when it happened in their district, begging for us to vote for that aid. This is the thing when you start separating. So I'm disappointed they didn't do it. We are committed to rebuilding these areas as vibrantly as we possibly can. And I will continue to go down this path that we are stronger together. I have those who scoffed from the beginning of this idea of one Minnesota and that we're different. And this idea that somehow the folks in greater Minnesota don't have a connection and the folks in Minneapolis don't have a connection to greater Minneapolis or greater Minnesota is simply false. And it's a narrative that is designed to divide us. So we'll figure this one out. We'll keep coming back. We'll make the appeal. Again, though, as I said, it's not all that unusual that this was denied. I wish they would take another look at it. I think we can make a good case.
We're going to wrap
Right.
there.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Yes. Yeah.
You were just watching Governor Walz discuss